Friends, welcome to the Chicken Coop, where we bring you discussion on yogic, Buddhist, and Christian philosophy. Today I wanted to talk about solitude. In today's talk I'm calling Inward with Grace, 6 Considerations for Solitude. So I've spent a considerable amount of time in isolation and solitude and meditation retreats. And there's a few things you learn before you go into solitude. And as many of us are moving into greater isolation in one way or another, whether it be physical or social, I thought these would be really useful to share. So I just wanted to share these 6 concepts today, and on how to thrive, how to use a situation of solitude to really thrive, because it's just a wonderful opportunity for strengthening and opening the heart. It can also be, as you may have noticed, it can be a kind of downward spiral into anxiety, self-absorption, these kinds of things. So what I wanted to help with today is have a little conversation about creating what might be a downward spiral and reversing that into an upward spiral. The first thing, and I'm proposing maybe the most important thing, is keep a schedule. So to schedule your time just becomes essential when you are at home. If you're working from home, or if you're quarantined at home, anything like that, schedule becomes absolutely essential. And I did a long 3-year retreat, and in that retreat, I don't think I could have survived without a schedule. Now, the schedule doesn't have to be strict, and in fact, it's even better to create a slightly spacious schedule. But I first got clued into this when living in the Abbey of Gethsemane, a really beautiful Trappist Cistercian Benedictine monastery. And there the life is incredibly scheduled. We meet for different hours of the day in the cathedral, and it was about 2 or 3 months into being there where I realized my whole body was already tuned into the schedule. And what happens with that is when you relax into the schedule, is it creates in other words, the external structure creates an internal freedom. So what we're talking about with these 6 things related to solitude are really about how to milk the most out of solitude, how to get the greatest benefit from it, and really how to create freedom in the mind. So it might seem counterintuitive that the more we restrict the external circumstances, the more freedom is in the mind. But that's what solitaries have found throughout history. Contemplatives have found that this kind of external structure creates a very fragrant and spacious internal life. One of my first teachers, and really my heart teacher, an Englishman named Murray Rogers, and I used to go stay with him in his ashram. And one part of the schedule there, again, a very structured, very scheduled life, one part of the schedule there was tea time. And so this I personally put in every schedule. It's just 4 o'clock, just take a break and have a cup of tea. No heavy conversation if you're with people, no logistics, just light conversation, a cup of tea, and some biscuits. Biscuits, aka cookies, are one of the most important parts at tea time, so you can't forget that. So just the way to make a schedule is put all of the things you need to do in a day, family stuff, whatever it is, and then just figure out where would things fit the best in the day. And then as much as you can create spaciousness around those things. There's one part of the schedule which becomes essential, and that is there's in the Tibetan tradition there's a mental disorder called lung, Loong, and I'll show you that written in a minute, but lung is a kind of mental disorder that happens in deep solitude. And I never fully believed in it because those of you that are interested in Ayurvedic dispositions, I generally have a kapha disposition. I don't get very what we call lungy. But when I went into deep solitude, I realized it's really real and it's really disruptive. So lung in Tibetan just means wind. And lung is a wind disorder. You can think of it as like a slight agitation in your pranic winds, a slight agitation in your chi, just a slight agitation in the body and in the mind. It can show up as giddiness, excitement. If you have small kids at home, they're probably lungy. They probably have some lung if they're quarantined, and you'll notice increased giddiness and silliness and that kind of stuff. So it can come up that way. It can come up as agitation, irritability, a bunch of things like that. And it's a specific kind of wind disorder. If you want to, we're not going to go into it much because it's a whole topic in and of itself, but it's an interesting thing to Google and to read about. But one thing that's really useful for lung is called sky gazing. And I do this every day. Literally, I schedule 15 minutes and I just go out and look at the sky. That's all. And just enjoy it. So you can, and this is, we'll get into this, but this is the skill of enjoyment, because you can look at the sky and then just start perseverating all of your typical thoughts. But for this, for sky gazing, we're really enjoying it, like consciously leaning into the experience of the sky. So sky gazing and tea time are my recommendations to put into a schedule. But you just schedule it, and this can be a wonderful thing to do with a family. You all sit down together and write out a schedule for the week. Okay, what's going to happen between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m.? When are meal times? You know, these kinds of things. And it's if you have children at home, or if you're with a partner or spouse, it can be wonderful to do it together. What I found with schedules is it usually takes some tweaking. So I'll do a schedule and then I will try it out for a day, I'll tweak it, I'll try it out for another day, I'll tweak it, and usually about 3 days I kind of hone in on a good schedule. And then I'll keep that schedule for a month or 3 months, whatever it is, and then I'll come back and revisit it and see if I need to switch anything up. But staying strict with the schedule, once you have it worked out, becomes essential. So really just living your life by the schedule. It sounds restricting. I just want to invite you to try it because it's really liberating. So that's the first one, is a schedule. Also, for a schedule, I schedule social media time. So it doesn't mean, you know, again, it's not strict. It's like I schedule break times. I told a friend of mine about this, and she sat down with her daughter to come up with a schedule, and she sent me the schedule. It was really good because it was like playtime, then break time, then snack time, and then break time. And I was like, yeah, she really got the spaciousness down. One way to create lung, if you want to really experience lung, is to overschedule yourself. And you know this feeling when you have too much going on and you get a kind of slight, see if you can physically feel it. It's physically in the body. It's a slight like agitation in the body. So that's lung. So another way of working with lung is through intelligent scheduling by keeping spaciousness for some flexibility in there. We had a class on this a couple of days ago, and a friend asked, well, what about spontaneity? I typically drop a schedule 2 times a month, and I do it based on lunar cycle, but you can, pick 2 times a month maybe to drop a schedule, or say every Sunday you drop the schedule and just do whatever you feel like. So figure out a way to incorporate spontaneity. But you will find that this need for spontaneity usually arises out of feeling weighted down by routine. What happens with a well-designed schedule is that weightedness lifts, and you find actually increased freedom and increased energy. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, scheduling. The second one is discipline. Unfortunately, I am not a highly disciplined person, but when I move into a retreat setting, or when I move into a setting with greater solitude, I really beef up my discipline. And discipline around what? I mean, a couple of things. One, discipline around the schedule. The other one is discipline around whatever it is that you do that is pleasurable in the moment and leaves you feeling depleted in the long run. In the Katha Upanishads, this is called preya. And preya are those activities which feel pleasurable in the moment but leave us feeling depleted in the long run. For me personally, it's overeating. I just have like a lack of satiation mechanism. So I tend to overeat. When you move into a time of solitude, if that starts to increase, it's going to pull you down fast. So this another classic couple ones, preya type of activities: television, surfing the internet, drinking alcohol, smoking pot. All of these things are basic preya activities. So in your normal life, do whatever you want to do, doesn't matter. But what I'm suggesting is when you're in a time of greater solitude, greater isolation, it becomes extremely useful to minimize those activities and push yourself. It's worthwhile. So for example, when I'm in solitude, when I'm in retreat, I don't snack, for example, and I have specific meal times, and I cut myself off, and so I just increase the discipline. So the discipline is around a couple things: schedule, stick to the schedule, and whatever your preya activities are, just try to be really disciplined around reducing that. The problem is many of us are actually out of touch with what our preya activities are. So that's the first thing, is just to be honest with yourself about the things. And again, we're all in the same boat. I teach a lot. I've taught all over the world. I've talked to many people. Everybody's got stuff they're dealing with, right? I mean, there are no saints among us in the classical sense. We all are just dealing with stuff. It's just part of being human. We all have those little areas where we go to release pressure in the crucible. And unfortunately, those areas usually leave us feeling diminished in the long run. So first, just be honest with yourself. Maybe talk with your partner, talk with your friends. Find, what are those areas where I over-engage and I feel depleted as a result. So that's the main thing for a schedule. The third thing is, and this is one of my favorite topics, and it's a big topic. We're not going to get into it in any depth, but I just want to introduce it, is learning to balance two forces of wildness and civility. So both wildness and civility have a positive and a negative aspect. So, for example, a positive wildness would be, literally being in the wild, going into the wild, right? That feeling of being out in nature, of the senses vitalized. Vitalized, is that a word? I think so. So the senses coming alive. A shadow aspect of wildness would be, a classic one would be excessive preya. Again, what's preya? Preya is any of those activities which we do, which depletes our prenatal chi, depletes our vital energy, depletes our upliftment. So excessive, that's what Las Vegas is built on, excessive wildness. And in the same with civility. For example, a negative form of civility would be a kind of totalitarian government. Being over, what would be the word? Over surveillanced. Just regimented to the point of where you feel constricted. A positive form of civility, well, I'll give you a classic example, tea time. Again, my teacher Murray, an Oxfordman, an Englishman, tea time was just a very natural form of civility. So you can explore this in your own life. Find, oh, what are those areas of civility? For example, a schedule can be both a negative and a positive form of civility. It can feel constricting and create create tightness, or it can feel like, for example, my experience with the Trappist is feeling completely liberated by the schedule. So explore what it is in your own life. What are these areas of wildness in your own life? Maybe places where you need more wildness, where you don't have enough positive aspects of wildness, and same with civility. So here's the main thing I want to share with you, is if you explore in your own life, you realize that there is a direct correlation between healthy wildness and healthy civility. So if your forms of healthy wildness are diminished, shadow forms of civility will rise up. Let me say that again. If your healthy forms of wildness are diminished, if you don't have access to healthy forms of wildness, your shadow or unhealthy forms of civility will rise up. Vice versa. If you don't have enough healthy forms of wildness, healthy forms of civility, then shadow wildness will rise up. I'll give you a classic example. Many of you have raised teenagers. Raising teenagers, there's this push and pull. What they're asking for, in a very roundabout way, is boundaries. Because as you get into your teenage years, you suddenly feel a certain boundlessness. It's exciting, the possibilities and those things, but it also is terrifying. So the parental unit creates boundaries to help the teen feel safe in order to explore healthy forms of wildness. Basic Psychology 101. When a parent doesn't provide those boundaries in a clear and intelligent way, then unhealthy forms of wildness will come up to try to find the edge of those boundaries. That's just an example. So why am I bringing this up? Because with increased solitude, it creates a kind of wildness which can be unnerving. A groundless state can arise. So what is very helpful with an increased wildness, in order for it not to become a negative wildness and turn into anxiety, depression, fear, perseverating, these are all would be unhelpful forms of wildness. So in order for this slightly, especially in unknown times like the time we're in right now, right? As the unknown is a form of wildness, in order for that to not turn into a state of anxiety, one technique is to increase civility, to balance that off. So as the civility increases, so too does the healthy forms of wildness. And then what would normally feel like a point of extreme anxiety becomes a point of spaciousness, that wild feeling of spaciousness. Again, counterintuitive, because I'm proposing spaciousness, the spaciousness of wildness, the I'm having a hard time with words today. The revitalizing aspect of wildness can come about through an increased civility. So number 3 is start to learn that balance, but particularly if that sounds too confusing, just work on increasing civility right now. And one way I want to propose that is dressing up, dressing nicely. So I first had this occur to me when I was a young man with a little less wisdom and more guts, and I spent a number of months hitchhiking around the country. And that's a very wild experience, right? I mean, every car you get into, you have no idea what's going to happen. So it's exciting and it's unnerving and it's wild. So I met this one time. I met this old timer who was had been hitchhiking his whole life, and he could tell I was ignorant of what I was doing. So we sat down and had a cup of coffee, and he taught me some techniques on how to properly hitchhike. The main one I want to share with you is he told me to wear a button-down shirt and a tie. So I did. I got a button-down shirt and a tie. And when I went hitchhiking, and I would be camping out. I would be like sleeping in parks and stuff. And then I would always take that shirt off when I was done hitchhiking, and I would fold it. I would put it in my backpack. And then the next morning, I would take that shirt out. I would unfold it and put on my button-down shirt and my tie. And it was so that's I realized the benefit of dressing up in wild situations. I had a friend who started working from home before it was popular, before computers, and he said in order for him to really do it, stay focused, he actually had to put on a shirt and tie when he went to work, and then when he was done with work, he took off his shirt and his button-down shirt and tie. So use, in this time of isolation, use clothes to your benefit. Costume yourself. So I wake up in the morning, if I'm spending all day at home, I will take a shower, get dressed up, do what work I have to do on the computer, and then when it's time for me to go out and do farm work, then I get another outfit. When I do yoga, I get another outfit, and when I do yoga and meditation. So just use clothes to your advantage to create a kind of form of civility. Also, another type of civility is cleanliness. And again, I'm not suggesting this for our normal lives. I'm just saying when we find ourselves in increased isolation, these are really useful tools. So as soon as isolation ends, just go back to how you've been living. But I just wanted to introduce these as techniques. So in increased isolation or in increased solitude, and these are also really useful if you're on a meditation retreat, a lot cleaner than you might normally be. Clean house regularly. If you're OCD around cleanliness, then you might want to decrease it a little bit. But in general, make your bed, fold your clothes, do your dishes right when you're done with them. Don't leave stuff in the sink, this kind of thing. Put things away. Just create a very orderly environment. So the first one, keep a schedule. Second one, discipline. Third one, start to play with this idea of wildness and civility, particularly increasing civility, particularly with wardrobe and with cleanliness. The fourth one is aparigraha. Aparigraha is something that comes out of the yogic philosophical world. We see it in a bunch of different yogic texts, but it means non-grasping. And when I did 3-year retreat, I had a food order form, and I would write down the food I needed. I would leave that order form in a bear-proof box, and then a caretaker who was helping me would pick that order form up 2 weeks later, and then 2 weeks after that, I would get the delivery of that food. In other words, it was 4 weeks before I got something I thought I needed. The reason I'm bringing this up is because when the mind goes into an increased solitude, it gets a little bit crazy with what it thinks it needs. It's a kind of grasping, and especially when it doesn't have access to things 24/7. So most of us are trying to avoid grocery stores right now. If you're watching this during the COVID pandemic, and we're trying to not go out of the house much, so we feel a limited access to the things we think we need. So my suggestion for this, to curb grasping, is what I found is I would write all this stuff down I thought I needed, that I was going to ask the caretaker for. And after 2 weeks of that being on the list, I would look at it and I'd be like, I'm crazy. I don't need like any of that stuff. So I would just cross it all off. I might need like a head of broccoli and some rice, but I would put stuff down like, oh my God, I need black duct tape, or, just random things. And after 2 weeks, I was like, no, I don't need that at all. It's just a kind of delusion in the mind that gets nervous and thinks it needs stuff. So my suggestion for this time is write things down that you think you need, and don't go on Amazon or whatever it is and just hit buy. Just wait a little while. Wait 2 weeks, and if you still feel like you need it in 2 weeks, then hit buy. But just try to increase this quality of non-grasping. Just increase this quality of not needing. My friend Lama Marut, who just sadly passed away recently, he had a beautiful mantra, and his mantra was, Om, I have enough, Ahum. It's a beautiful thing just to say to yourself when you're on Amazon.com. Om, I have enough, Ahum. I was recently reading a psychology journal about how one of the big pharmacy, what do you call them, like corner stores that sell everything, like a pharmacy and has a pharmacy in it. I'm not going to name the store, but one of the stores had a technique, and if you next time you go into one of these pharmacy corner stores, check it out and see if you can figure out which one it is. But their technique was to create everything slightly off balance. The reason is because when we're anxious, we buy more. It's just basic human psychology, right? Consumer psychology. So they actually put everything in the store a little bit off balance, a little bit, so you can't notice it, but unconsciously, when you walk in, you feel a little bit agitated. And they found, the statistics showed that agitation created an increase in sales. So just know that that's part of our makeup, that when we get anxious, we buy. And know that we're in a time of anxiety with increased solitude, increased isolation. And just try to curb that by just holding off. Wait 2 weeks and then just see, do I really need this thing? Another thing with grasping, and you'll see this, a kind of cousin of grasping is resenting others' good fortune. And I feel like it is one of our greatest superpowers that we have an ability to turn resentment and grasping and coveting into rejoicing. It takes a little effort, but it's completely possible. So also in this fourth category of aparigraha, I wanted to just encourage us to play with this idea of rejoicing in the good fortune of other people. So, for example, right now there seems to be a shortage of toilet paper. So if somebody else has more toilet paper than you, you can just rejoice in their good fortune. There's another aspect of rejoicing which is a little more subtle, which I just wanted to introduce because it's so powerful, which is a kind of lojong practice in Tibetan Buddhism. And lojonging, I use it as a lojonging, to actually do something, right? And lojonging is when you're having some discomfort, you turn it into a kind of prayer and think, since I'm having this discomfort, may nobody else have this discomfort. For example, the other night I was having insomnia. So normally with something like insomnia, I would think like, oh, I've got to get some sleep. This is really not working out. I've got a lot to do tomorrow. I can't be up all night. Like it creates a perseveration of thought. When you lojong that, instead you change and you can feel it's a similar thing to rejoicing, but you take the narrative and you say, since I'm up and since my mind is a little agitated and I can't sleep, may at least all of my neighbors around me sleep peacefully. May I be absorbing all of the agitation in my apartment building or in my neighborhood so that others may sleep peacefully. And it's a beautiful way of turning an uncomfortable state into a kind of prayer life. So I just wanted to introduce that. It's really also a beautiful way of dealing with pain and discomfort. So yeah, and there's a lot to say with that, but we'll keep it at that for now. Number 5. This is a concept called wind horse. Chogyam Trungpa really brought this term to light, and he had a very specific way of talking about it. There's a lot of discussion on what it really means and how to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it in a specific way. It's not the only way. But wind horse is lungta in Tibetan, and lung again meaning wind. We talked about it as a wind disorder, but here it just means wind. Another word for wind is prana. Another word for prana is chi, and if you're unfamiliar with any of those terms, chi is simply what you're working with when you go to acupuncture. Putting needles in your body is moving the chi, so it's a subtle, like the way that energy moves through the body. So lungta, ta means horse, so wind horse, the wind horse, and typically the way I want to propose wind horse is, how can we uplift our energy? Because prana can kind of start to downward cycle, and it can create a heaviness, or it can rise up and create a lightness. And when we're in increased solitude, there's a danger of getting heavy. And I want to introduce two words that every solitary should know. And the first one is ennui. Ennui. And ennui, I think of it as a kind of, it's like an existential tedium mixed with boredom. Like an existential tedium mixed with boredom. And these are really subtle emotions. So it's a beautiful thing to start increasing our emotional vocabulary, so we can be very nuanced with what's happening in our emotional life. So ennui is a kind of, it's a kind of boredom, but it's also a boredom that's mixed with a kind of existential angst. The second one is acidya. And acidya is, it's a light depression, and acidya is specifically, when you Google it, you'll see it's really related to Christian deep retreat, but it's really, it does absolutely come up in any kind of solitude, and it's a light depression mixed with a loss of joy. So a light depression mixed with a loss of joy. But I just want to encourage you to write these words down. And just Google them, explore them, and then specifically look for them in your own heart and mind when you go into acidya. They also call it the noonday demon, because it oftentimes hit the early monastics in the middle of the day. And then this is lung, what we talked about earlier with his lung. Both means just generic wind, but it also means specifically a wind disorder. So wind horse is when you have acidya or when you have ennui, when those come up, how to combat that. When there's kind of slight depression or kind of angst or tedium or boredom set in, loss of joy, loss of interest, loss of feeling meaning, these things will just inevitably come up, how to work with them. And this is just, I'm just going to give you a couple personal things from my own life that helped me in deep solitude. One was to actually change my posture, right? So like this it's creating a curling in, and that curling in is creating a kind of pranic downward spiral. So one way of doing that, like for example, you'll never be in a yoga class where the teacher tells you to roll your shoulders in, collapse your heart, and bend, just make yourself small. Rather, it's the opposite. It's open up the chest, right? Open the arms, open the shoulder blades. So it's this kind of upliftment. And I found in retreat, I was really amazed how just physically changing my posture actually increased a wind horse, increased the upward movement of pranic wind. The other technique I used a lot, and it might sound absurd, but I would, when I was feeling that the prana was starting to downward spiral, I would go outside and I would do a victory stance. Just like, yes, like after, a quadruple flip on the gymnast mat, and they just land it. And I would do that repeatedly. I would like do the landing victory sign. And it's just uplifting, and also even increasing a slight smile in the lips. These things actually there's so many muscles in the face that when we smile, it increases this kind of pranic upliftment in the eyes and in the face. Another thing I did, and this is going to sound terrifying to some of you, but I had a lot of tarantulas in retreat with me. And if you watch tarantulas, especially tarantulas, but spiders in general, they have a lot of nobility in their movement. I know I'm anthropomorphizing, but it looks like that. You can pretend that. And they move very intentionally, and especially tarantulas, and very slowly and very beautifully. So I would get right down on the ground, because tarantulas are completely harmless and beautiful creatures. So I would get right down on the ground and just eye level with them, as close as I could comfortably feel, which at first wasn't very close, and then it started to get closer. And I would just admire their nobility. And then I would try to, and again, admiring a quality in somebody or some animal helps bring that quality into you. So I would admire nobility. My partner and I just watched this morning a whole herd of deer jump across a really wide creek. We were hiking in the woods. And it was so wide that like some deer were scared to do it, and they had kept that you could see them like about to go for it, and then they would lose their nerve and they would circle around. But when they finally did it, it was so noble. It was so like gorgeous. It was really awe-inspiring. It was really just gorgeous. So that kind of animals can help us bring this kind of nobility into us. So the fifth one is just somehow figure out a way of increasing wind horse when you're finding that that ennui or that asadhya is starting to creep in. Actively, before it takes hold of you, actively increase wind horse. A beautiful way of doing that is asana, yoga asana practice. It absolutely, it's called, right, the yoga high is the minute when we finish a strong yoga practice, we feel this upliftment, right? The prana is now moving in our system. So again, in normal life, it doesn't matter what you do. In deep solitude, when you feel that noonday demon, that kind of light depression and loss of joy start to overtake you, it becomes incredibly important to combat that, counteract that with some kind of upliftment, some kind of wind horse activity. You can also see this in military parades. That creates an upliftment, and how the military hold themselves. That's intentional to create this upliftment of energy. It's not a depressed energy, right? It's a powerful, uplifted energy. And then the last thing I want to share with you is number 6, is that right now, because we're in a pandemic and I'm seeing a lot of suffering in the world, and I'm hearing a lot of suffering from friends, and there's a lot of collective anxiety and fear in the world, that it can, what's the word? It can minimize our capacity to be caring individuals because we get overwhelmed, right? So the last one is to try to increase care through metta practices. What is metta? Metta is basically loving kindness practices through prayer. So We schedule our lives here all year round with starting the day off with what's called a shamatha practice, a stillness concentration practice, the development of stability of attention. And then in the evening, we do that again, a smaller, shorter version, and then we finish the day off with prayers. And presently, right now, we're using the Anglican prayer book, Christian prayer book, and we're doing what's called Prayers of the People. This is a beautiful, so each evening we pray for a specific group. Like one night we pray for youth. Another night we pray for refugees, orphans, anybody experiencing the despair of loneliness. So we just go through that each evening, and it's a way of keeping the concern muscle alive and active, especially when you might feel helpless at times. So I just wanted to encourage you to, whatever your belief system is or whatever tradition you come out of, to increase metta practices, bodhisattva practices, prayer practices, any practices that help you exercise your concern muscle, your muscle that allows you to care about other beings. And I believe that's all I have to share with you for now. So let's quickly do a review. Number 1, keep a schedule. Okay. Number 2, increase discipline, specifically discipline around the schedule and discipline around prayer activity. Number 3, start to explore the relationship between wildness and civility, specifically in a time like this, or in a deep meditation retreat, or in time where anxiety can be increased. Increase beautiful aspects of civility. I forgot to say one thing about this. Another way of increasing civility is have beautiful, slow meal times. And if you have kids, it's a beautiful way to get the kids involved. Set the table beautiful. Go out and pick some weeds and put them into a little floral arrangement. And just make a really nice, slow meal and have a proper dinner. Slow dinner. That's a very civil thing to do, like the Sunday family meal. So if you're on kind of a home quarantine, to incorporate that weekly can be really beautiful, and have everybody get involved. Maybe have your daughter make a dessert, your son set the table, whatever it is. So that's another beautiful aspect of civility. Aparigraha, non-grasping. Specifically, have a list of things you think you need. Wait 2 weeks before you act on that. Number 5, increase wind horse. When the energy starts to get depressed, figure out ways to bring it up. Another way of doing this that I forgot to mention is walking from your hara. Your hara is about 3 fingertips below your belly button. Try walking as if you're being pulled from that point. Feel how different it is. It's also very good for lung. And then try as an experiment, try walking from your head, and then try walking from your hara. So just try walking from your heart. Try walking from different areas. But a way of increasing wind horse is walking from the hara, from just below the navel. It's almost a little bit like a swagger. You just create a little bit of a swagger. And you don't have to do this in normal life, but just if you're in solitude and you're feeling like a decrease of wind horse, of pranic energy. And then number 6, do increase some kind of loving kindness practice, especially at the end of the day. Another thing to say about that is I have a rule, and I highly encourage anybody to adopt this rule. And that rule is I do not engage deep thoughts between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. Because especially between midnight and 4 a.m., thoughts will come up that will create anxiety. And you will perseverate on those. So if I have any thoughts come up between those hours, I just say cancel. or I come back to them. If they're really bad, I can even write them down and say, I'll come back to you at 6 a.m. And then oftentimes in the morning after a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, you realize, it's not that big of a deal. So I hope this is helpful for you. And we'll see you again next time in the chicken coop.